This is not an advanced combat base thousands of miles from home. This is Nellis Air Force Base near Las Vegas, Nevada. And the battle you just witnessed wasn't real. But the lessons learned in that battle will not soon be forgotten by the young pilots who went through it. Because this is air combat training, as realistic as human ingenuity and advanced technology can make it. This is Red Flag.
The real name of this whole game is the most realistic combat training possible. We often refer to it as the scrimmage before the game. But what the real bottom line is, it's the best possible training we have any place in the world and get the closest we can to combat situation.
Colonel William Luke is the commanding officer of the 4440th Tactical Fighter Training Group, the home of Red Flag. Here, every day, more than 100 of the world's most advanced aircraft launch skyward to tangle in a high-speed air battle.
A good percent of our missions are flown with live bombs. It's not unusual for 60 aircraft to be across targets in very close proximity in less than 10 minutes.
Colonel Doug Melson, second in command at Red Flag, remembers coming here as a new player.
The first several Red Flag sorties that I flew, I was flying in the F-15 here TDY from Europe, and it had been many years since I'd been involved in a true combat situation, but I couldn't help but walk away from those initial sorties saying, I've been here before, and this is really as close to combat as I think I want to get without actually being in it.
Since the earliest biplane battles, the technology and techniques of aerial combat have changed dramatically. But one fact has remained surprisingly constant. In every era, the pilot who survives his first few combat missions is very likely to survive the rest.
In the early stages, they are wrapped up in the conduct of the mission, just as they have been in the past in their home units. Just getting from point A to point B and getting their bomb on target on time, they're pretty much maxed out with that. And the throwing in or the addition of ground and air-to-air threats, generally they can't do both because their time efficiency hasn't been developed to the point where they can do both well enough to keep them alive throughout the entire mission.
American pilots have always trained to improve their flying and gunnery skills, but in Vietnam they suffered a rude awakening. Despite their advanced training and equipment, they achieved a far lower kill ratio than in previous wars. Colonel Jim Evans is the deputy commander for adversary tactics at Red Flag.
Air Force did a study that took us all the way back to World War I, and we kind of used the kill ratio as a measure of merit. So in World War I, the American pilots had an air-to-air kill ratio of 2.5 to 1. That's 2.5 enemy knockdown for each one of us that were lost. In World War II, 3 to 1. In Korea, 10 to 1. And in Vietnam, 2 to 1. And at the middle of that war, that conflict, it was probably closer to 1 to 1.
What went wrong in Vietnam?
They employed their aircraft. They didn't have many of them, and so they husbanded them very smartly, and they employed them very smart. They very seldom would allow themselves to get drawn into a situation where they were at a disadvantage. They just would not engage if they were at a disadvantage. The major threats we faced then was the SA-2 guideline missile and the AAA, the radar-guided guns, and again mainly because of their density and their ability, very limited numbers of targets that we had. Their targets were clustered very close together, so it was relatively easily defended, and they mounted a tremendous density ratio of guns there.
But post-Vietnam studies also pointed to deficiencies in U.S. pilot training. Colonel Luke.
I went in 1968 to Southeast Asia as a young lieutenant. I'd finished pilot training, went to training in the F-4, and immediately went right to Southeast Asia. When we were training air-to-air, we always fought against each other. And we very seldom talked about anything except the capabilities of how to fight or how to train F-4s against F-4s or that kind of capability.
In the aftermath of Vietnam, the Air Force laid out 3 clear goals for improved combat training. The first goal was to provide realistic combat scenarios, incorporating a full range of hostile threats on thousands of square miles of ranges in the American West. The second goal was to create a simulated hostile fleet of dissimilar aircraft with broad variations in performance, not unlike the mix that pilots might face in wartime. The third goal was to create a special aggressor force of instructor pilots schooled in the doctrine and tactics of the most likely enemy forces.
Many of these pilots were only 10 years old when Americans last experienced large-scale air combat. And their potential enemies have more and better aircraft than ever before, increasingly sophisticated air defenses, and improved tactical doctrine. Red Flag is designed to improve the chances for these pilots in the event they have to go to war.
I can almost use an analogy of a football game in that most all football coaches take their second team and run the adversary's plays against their first team. We do the same.
The playing field for Red Flag spreads over more than 12,000 square miles of southwestern desert. But the real action is concentrated in an area roughly half the size of the state of New Jersey. Lieutenant Colonel Martin Bonin is one of the people in charge of the range.
The 1,400 targets out there, we have simulated a typical battle scene with a forward edge of the battle area. We have a simulated tank column breaking through. Behind that, we've got resupply columns. And in the very rear area of our bombing range, we have simulated strategic targets, airfields, resupply depots, and things like that.
Even more important, there are radars that match the performance and electronic signature of enemy radars. Threat simulators that lock onto unwary aircraft, guiding guns that do everything but fire real shells, and simulated surface-to-air missiles that let the pilot know his aircraft has been shot down. Red Flag exercises are conducted 5 times a year at Nellis, as selected units are flown in from their home bases. For this Red Flag exercise, more than 300 aircraft have flown into Nellis. McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagles from Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. General Dynamics F-111s from Laken Heath, England. Dassault Mirages and Dassault BA Jaguars from France and Africa. First Lieutenant John Bratton has come from England, where his F-111 squadron is stationed.
There's a lot of excitement in being told you're coming to Red Flag. It means a lot of hard work to be prepared for it, but boy, once you get here, you really find out it's worth it. You a lot of academics, which basically you have to study on your own time, and then the flying training, you get an increased sortie allotment, which you're going to be flying more missions right before you go to Red Flag to get your skills fine-tuned.
Red Flag involves far more than just combat air crews. All the operational personnel, ground crews, and equipment of each unit are also brought to the exercise.
To prepare and come to Red Flag, it involves a lot of time and man hours and a lot of individuals' parts to figure out how many parts we're going to have to bring and how many airplanes, how many pilots, how many maintenance people, how we're going to get them there, you know, how many 141s it's going to take to airlift us here. And they bring the 141s to Holloman and load us all up, load the pallets on, airlift us here. We get off, we unload our pallets and set up shop in a hangar, just like this one. Then the jets come in, we recover them, and get them prepped for the next day's flying, so they can go out and fight.
In addition, all the support aircraft that would be associated with real combat are involved. For example, Boeing KC-135 tankers from Strategic Air Command, Lockheed C-130 and C-131 cargo transports from Trenton Royal Canadian Air Force Base, and Boeing AWACS. From tankers for in-flight refueling to sophisticated electronic warfare aircraft. Nothing is left out. Air crews from Allied Air Forces are also part of Red Flag, adding valuable experience with Allied doctrine and with other types of aircraft that aren't in the U.S. inventory. Captain Jean-Luc Crochard of the French Tactical Air Force.
We are doing the same job, that's flying aircraft, and we also have the same aim. But what's interesting in meeting those guys is to see the difference of the preparation, the difference of work, and also see the difference in the aircraft.
Taken together, the units brought in for red flag training are known as the Blue Forces, more than 100 aircraft working together for the first time. For the 2 weeks of their red flag exercise, they'll be flying against more than 100 aggressor aircraft, the Red Forces. The sheer numbers of high-performance aircraft simulating warfare in a limited airspace makes flight safety a major concern.
I'm sitting in the Range Operations Center, codenamed Blackjack. In here we primarily work on flight safety on the ranges. The ranges are divided into many areas, and we try to deconflict all the flights in there, ensure that one flight isn't flying in while another flight is working, for instance. Here's a typical view of the range information system as we see it on a daily basis. As you can see, we have outlined the entire range complex, all the different parts of that complex, as well as some other items. For instance, in the upper right-hand corner, we have an air refueling track displayed. You can see the white borders of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona displayed, as well as California. We have aircraft coded in different colors. For instance, we have our aggressor aircraft coded in red, and our Blue Forces are generally coded in green.
No matter how you look at it, Red Flag is simply the world's most sophisticated and fully equipped training ground for aerial combat.
With Valmet's new ReadyGo, you can combine primary and basic training in a 2-in-1 syllabus of 100 hours. And for better pilot selection, the side-by-side seating enables you to observe the trainees' flying and psychological progress. Simultaneously, the turboprop ReadyGo allows you all the acrobatics at high enough speeds to prepare your trainee for the advanced trainer he'll go on to next. This safe, high-performance aircraft can cut almost $500,000 off the training costs of each pilot. This means, with ReadyGo, you minimize costs and maximize quality.
This is the Adversary Tactics Building at Nellis Air Force Base, home of the 64th and 65th Aggressor Squadrons. From the outside, it looks a lot like any other U.S. Air Force building, but the interior decor has a distinctly different style. This is where aggressor trainees, both pilots and ground controllers, are immersed in the culture, history, and military doctrine of their most likely air war opponents. The objective is to create a special force, thoroughly indoctrinated and retrained, who will instinctively react to air combat situations, just as enemy pilots would. The deputy commander of the aggressor forces is Colonel Jim Evans.
What we do, our mission is to emulate Soviet fighter pilots, to train our pilots against Soviet tactics, to make sure they're prepared should they get in any engagement with Soviets or people trained by Soviet pilots. We study the Soviet aircraft and the Soviet equipment, and we send our pilots regularly to our top intelligence agencies to interface one-on-one with the people that are the best experts in the Soviet aircraft and the Soviet equipment. Then we take our pilots and study how Soviets fly that equipment, those airplanes, the tactics that they fly, and the formations that they fly. And Russian tactics are based upon deception, deceiving maneuvers, flanking maneuvers, and decoy. And the object is to get the American pilot to look at a decoy, follow the decoy when the real threat is off to the side, coming in from low or high, or out of the proverbial high out of the sun.
Members of the aggressor squadrons are among the Air Force's most experienced pilots. For admission to aggressor program, regulations require that they have a minimum of 500 hours of fighter time, equal to 3 or 4 years of experience. But aggressor duty is so desirable to skilled instructor pilots that the average level of experience is almost 3 times as high, from 1,200 to 1,500 hours of fighter time.
While many of the units that come to train at Red Flag fly more modern F-15s and F-16s, The aggressor squadrons fly the older and smaller F-5, painted to resemble Soviet aircraft. If the intention is to give realistic combat training, why such a disparity in equipment?
The F-5 is very, very close in both size and performance to the MiG-21. In performance, they're almost exact. There are some limitations as far as ordnance, and there's some differences in the radar capabilities. They're both extremely limited radars, internal radars. The range is somewhat less in the MiG-21, but for all intents and purposes, the F-5 is an extremely good MiG-21 simulator. Because of their experience and their skill, even though they're flying a second-generation airplane, compared to F-5 compared to an F-16 or F-15 is really looking at the airframes themselves is no contest. But when you put that experienced pilot in there, he could generally outfly the student or the operational pilot almost any day, any given day. And as I say, the objective of the aggressor program is not to do that. The objective is to go out there and provide that realistic threat so that the operational pilot will learn, expand his capabilities and his experience, and not